Now let's take a deeper dive into Obama's trip. We are joined by Thione Niang, an activist, political consultant, and founder of the Give One project aimed at African youth, and by Emira Woods, co-director Foreign Policy in Focus at the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington. Welcome to both of you.
Great to be with you.
Yes, I want to start with you, Niang. You see, President Obama has been criticized for putting Africa kind of in the back banner. Does this trip vindicate him?
Well, I never thought that the president put Africa in a back burner, first of all. As the ambassador just eloquently stated, he had some priorities to deal with in the United States. We tend to forget that President Obama was elected by Americans to take care of the immediate problems of the United States first. And when he got in office, we were left by a lot of problems. The two wars, and he had to handle it, to take care of our economic issues here in the United States. And now is the right time for him to go to Africa because the time is right. Yeah. And I think him going to Senegal and the other two countries, South Africa and Tanzania, is a strong message he's sending to follow up on the trip in Ghana.
Yeah, but still, Emira, would you say that perhaps the expectations were so high such that nobody wanted to understand what are the problems he had to deal with right here at home?
Absolutely. You know, it was historic. A son of Africa being in the highest office on the land in the White House. There was euphoria throughout the continent and also very high expectations. And I think, you know, throughout the continent, what you see is that those expectations have really been dashed because, you know, people recognize that the President of the United States is seeking first and foremost the interest of Americans, and I think expectations have been much more curtailed now in the second term of the Obama administration.
Yes, you see, trips to Africa can go back to Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1943, and then later on, President Jimmy Carter visited Liberia. In fact, the two of them visited Liberia. President Carter in 1978, and then of course the modern kind of trips to Africa by U.S. President can say was set kind of the pattern was set by President Bill Clinton and then later Bush. Is President Obama dealing with the challenge of trying either to match or outdo his predecessors? Yeah.
I don't think so. I think this is the right time for the United States to look at this relationship with Africa, because the Africa we have today is not the Africa we had yesterday. Yesterday was the Africa you send out AIDS. It's not the same anymore. The whole world is going to Africa. China is there, Brazil is there, the rest of the world is there. And 8 out of 12 most booming economies, growing fast economies in the world today are in Africa. So not dealing with Africa in a certain level of partnership is a mistake. So I think it's just right that the United States president is going there to talk about bilateral, issues politically, but also partnerships with the United States, what they can bring to the table. Not on the approach of let's see how we can send, how many aids we can send in Africa, but now into the partnership thing. And that makes me think about another issue. I can let you finish and ask the question, but it would be great to talk about.
We'll look at that, but some have said that the president's trip is more of a statement to the countries that he's keeping, as it is a statement on the countries that he's visiting. What's your take on that?
Well, I think you as a Kenyan probably know best. The Kenyans are most angry probably of all that he has not included Kenya in the itinerary. I think clearly you have 54 countries, and any of the countries would have been appropriate for the President of the United States to visit. A clear message is being sent to go to Francophone Africa, to go to South Africa, which is the engine of economic growth for the continent, but also to go to Tanzania, which has been a longtime partner of the U.S. You know, again, both Senegal, Tanzania, countries that have significant Muslim populations that have been beacons of stability for quite some time. So I think it's quite appropriate that those are the countries selected. Yes, it would have been nice to have had more, I'm sure, but I think for this trip, it sends quite significant messages.
Very quickly, I want you to share this. In terms of real, for example, engagement, particularly economically in Africa, is there much more than has been done that many on the continent really appreciate, perhaps? Niang?
Well, there is a lot that's being done with AGOA, with the MCC, the Millennium Challenge account. But me particularly, all of those programs are good. Okay, I'm not just saying that they're not important to me. But what I said to the White House, and I continue to say, is that those things are important, but we got to look at the issue of education in Africa. and the young people.
Millions.
You have 65% of the population in Africa are under 35 years old, and 50% of those young people are underemployed. That's one thing. The second thing is 90% of those young people don't have even, to many of those countries, decent education. I'm not talking about the numbers where we just go to school, but go to school to not even be able to buy a pen. I do a tour with Give One Project around those countries, speaking to young people all over the continent. And unfortunately, the President Obama, has to talk to those presidents in Africa to focus more on investing our natural resources on quality education for young Africans.
Because
we can do all of these bilateral things, but if we don't prepare the young leaders of Africa, it won't amount to anything.
The future is in the hands of the youth.
Yes.
Your quick response to
Without
my
a doubt,
question.
the U.S. has been focused on especially the extractive industries in Africa, oil, gas, mining, and now we also include land with the tremendous land grabs that are happening throughout the continent. But until there is value added, around the continent, people are talking about jobs. So from Detroit to Dakar, the issue is manufacturing, how to help build the infrastructure that will create jobs, decent jobs for people, particularly young people who are college educated and are unable to find a way forward in their lives and in their communities.
Thank you very much. I wish we could stretch this time a little farther. Thank you both, Thione and Emira, for joining us here today. Now, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is VOA Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com.